in this session is how we can build BI solutions that are faster, cheaper, and with fewer resources. And I think that's kind of the holy grail that a lot of people are looking at when they're trying to implement business intelligence solutions. IQ for Business is a BI company. We differentiate ourselves by really focusing on the way that people look at business problems and how the human thinks, and we design software to help enable people to work the way that they innately think about solving business problems. And we like to say that we take your data and we turn it into actionable information. We're a Microsoft Gold partner. We've won a couple of Gartner awards, and we have a tremendous package that we offer to really facilitate business intelligence. When we take a look at the pressure that's really driving BI investment, there's a couple of things that really jump out. The first thing is the inability to identify revenue growth opportunities. So when you're looking at CEOs, this is their #1 problem, is just identifying these growth opportunities. And when we're asked to implement these BI systems, really what they're asking all of us to do is to help them do that. Help me find how I can grow the company. Well, the CFOs and the CIOs' #1 reason for wanting to have BI is that they have poor visibility into day-to-day operations. How many times have they asked for reports and they just of what's going on, and they just really can't see what's going on? CFOs and CIOs, both of them, their #2 reason is slow access or lack of access to relevant information. And the reason that these problems happen is that this data is scattered throughout a company, and it's not in one place that makes it easily consumable. Well, what's keeping companies from implementing these type of BI solutions really is in large part due to the lack of IT bandwidth. These are very large projects that get scoped out, and most companies' IT departments are very much taxed with doing lots of other things, and they just don't have time to be implementing BI. Software and services are too expensive. Companies are looking for ROI on many of their investments, and when they look at BI, they don't see the ROI over there. And I'm going to spend a lot of today's session talking about different ways to look at that. #3 is poorly defined requirements. Poorly defined requirements always cause projects to take a lot longer, and it leads to a lot of ambiguity up front, trying to understand what is it that we're really trying to build. And finally, the technology is too difficult to implement. When you start thinking about rolling out a BI project, the requirements grow, and people start to be a little bit gun-shy about doing the implementation. Well, what's really the problem? Let's start to think about that. Well, 70 to 80% of BI projects fail according to Gartner. Their conclusion is that poor communication is really to blame. If you take a look at this figure and you compare it to the way that software is built, essentially what happens is that IT treats BI as an engineering problem that requires some type of software package to solve that problem. And this may be a part of the problem, and is probably a false assumption. BI projects are really not a software package that you roll out. BI projects are different within the construct of each company because everybody's data is different, everybody's end results in terms of what they're looking for, the KPIs that they use to measure are different, their corporate structures are different. So BI projects really resemble software development projects more than really software rollout projects. So people buy BI thinking they're going to roll it out like a tool, like you would an email system or some other piece of technology where you just put it on the user's desk and they can start to figure out how to use it. But it really doesn't work that way. And again, this is why there's such high failure rate for BI projects. Software projects have about a 45% failure rate. So the question is, why is that these are so much more difficult to implement? Well, part of the problem is that the end user's questions are not technical in nature. Really, a lot of them are psychological and sociological. They're looking to try to figure out who are my best customers, where do they live, how am I going to be able to get them to buy something else this year, what kind of discounts can I offer them. There's a lot of questions that don't necessarily, aren't really solved necessarily by a technology, but really by human intelligence that's layered on top of that to understand the business problem. Well, agile development, when you apply it to software, reduces the failure rate to about 20%. So this is an interesting concept, because if BI fails at 70 to 80% and agile software fails at 20%, wouldn't it be nice if we could get our BI projects into that rate of failure too? Well, applying agile to BI should do the same thing. So we're going to be talking a little bit about how to use agile development methods to improve communication, which is the #1 reason that projects fail, and allow your BI project to be much more successful, and in turn then have a much higher ROI. When we started designing our software, we wanted to look at what best-in-class companies really want from a solution. And what we found is the following, that companies really want to be able to identify and enhance data sources for use with their BI systems. So it comes in #4 in terms of what they want. But what's interesting here is that what they really want, if you think about it at a high level, is that they want to take disparate data that they have, whether it's in a spreadsheet or it's in the CRM system or the ERP system, and they want to combine that. And there's been a lot of talk recently too about combining that with big data. And what this is traditional business intelligence. This is getting all that data together so that they can view it and make better business decisions based upon it. Well, the next thing that they're looking for is enabling self-service delivery of BI solutions. And this is kind of interesting, because enabling self-service BI is really more about empowering knowledge workers, which is really trying to add a level of human intelligence on top of the data, more so than really data and creating more data assets. The #1 thing that best-in-class companies look for in a solution is their ability to align activities to strategic performance indicators. So best-in-class companies usually have a 5 to 10 key performance indicators that they knew that if they moved the needle on, that they would be more profitable as a company. So aligning everybody's efforts on those strategic indicators is something that is key to success. And what they really are asking for is to have the people within their companies be able to collaborate on key metrics. And again, this is human intelligence more than business intelligence. And finally, they look to deliver BI and analytic capabilities to more users. Well, what are they really saying there? What they're really saying is they would like to have BI without boundaries. They want that analytic capability to be available not only internally, but possibly with their vendors, their customers, etc. The data is an asset that is only valuable if we are able to use it and pull insights from it. So what's interesting here is that 3 out of 4 of the things that best-in-class companies ask for are really about human intelligence, not business intelligence. Our solution looks something like this, and I won't spend very much time at all talking about our technology, but I just wanted to give you an idea of what it is that we built. We have a back-end technology that allows us to pull together disparate data sets, and we have it's called Halo Source, and we have a technology called Halo Arrays that allows us to link out to any type of data set that we want to look at, including big data. We have a visualization piece which is called Halo Prism that empowers workers to be able to look at the data and make decisions based upon it and to do their analysis. We have a layer that's called Halo Rings that allows us to cooperate on key metrics amongst groups, and I will talk more about collaboration because it's extremely important to the success of a BI project. And finally, we have a component called Halo Span, and Halo Span is our ability to have companies outside your firewall be able to access the BI data that you have internally and collaborate with you on that. So let's take a look for a moment at who is the real audience for all of these BI requests. And what's happened is these are really something that's called knowledge workers. Back in the 60s, there was a man named Peter Drucker who wrote a book, and he coined the term knowledge worker. And what he really realized is that the economy was shifting from being a blue-collar economy to a white-collar economy. There were these fundamental shifts that were occurring. And up until then, there's pretty much 50% blue collar, 50% white collar workers. But with the advent of the computers and in white collar jobs, what ended up happening is that the whole characteristic of the workforce changed. So with blue collar workers, you can scale them very easily. So for instance, if you have a cashier at Walmart and you want to, you have too many people in that line, you can simply bring in more cashiers to run more lines, and it's very low cost to train them how to do that, and it's very linear in terms of its scalability. So if I need to open 5 checkout lines during the holiday rush season, I can do that. If I need to hire more people to run the check stands, I can pretty much do that too. Very easy to scale. With white collar though, there's a problem. The intelligence that is in the people's head that they're using to make business decisions is not easily scalable. So for instance, if you have developers building software, you can't just double the development staff and have your development time cut in half. And I'm sure you've heard that analogy before. Well, as we move into the 2000s and 2010s, you see that white-collar workers have now become 70% of the workforce. And this really becomes the audience of business intelligence. So who are these people anyway? These are people who think for a living. And so we have to accommodate them with technology and software to be able to do their jobs. So what is a characteristic of one of these people? Because they are the largest part of your workforce. Well, these are people who typically spend 15 to 30% of their working time actively searching for information within the company, and about half of those searches are considered to be successful. Well, it's pretty easy to figure there then half aren't, and they're not getting the information that they need. These type of people have about 2.1 hours a day that are lost due to interruptions and diverting their attention in a multitasking environment. And I'm sure that all of you would consider yourselves to be knowledge workers, and just think about the number of interruptions you get per day and how much more productive you would be if those interruptions weren't there. Workers also react to 40% of their email within 4 seconds, and email is a very insidious thing. Every time you have that little icon pop up in the lower right-hand corner, what's the first thing that you do? You click on it, and you open up the email and you read it. And what ends up happening is that it distracts you from the task at hand. And where you might have decisions that you need to make and get back to people, what ends up happening is that on average, you're spending 15 minutes or so responding to that email, and what happens is a lot of time is wasted. With that, the studies have shown that there's about 2.4 hours of effective work time per day. And in some cases, people feel there's even less than that. If you could just increase the effectiveness, for instance, of people getting to the data or being able to communicate with each other so there aren't the constant interruptions, by just in half an hour per person for a 100-person company, you could save 15,000 hours of productivity per year. Right here is one measure of ROI. This is 7.5 people full-time that you could hire, either not pay or hire, to be doing something else within your company. So what's interesting is that technology is only half of the problem. Humans are really the bigger half of the problem. In order to understand this, I'd like to talk a little bit about decisions and the human decision-making process. Well, decisions drive businesses, and BI supports those decisions. And I've looked at a lot of studies, and they range from anywhere from 612 decisions to 3,500 decisions that a person makes per day. But think about it, when you first wake up and you grab your smartphone and you take a look at the email that came in overnight, and you start making decisions about whether you're going to get back to these people or not. And you get to the office and you have another pile of decisions that you need to make for the emails. You're called into meetings, you make decisions, you make a decision whether or not you're going to get back to somebody, etc. Well, what ends up happening during the course of the day is let's say you make 500 business-related decisions, and everyone else in your company does too. Well, if you think about it, your company is really just a collection of decisions. So in a company with 100 workers, you're looking at something like 15 million decisions that drive that company. So if you could make collectively better decisions based on better data, versus, and essentially making fewer mistakes, how much more profitable would your company be? And what really differentiates companies that are successful from companies that are not is that they make more correct decisions. So enabling people to make these decisions is key. Here is the human intelligence continuum. This is a graph that shows context versus understanding. Now, this is the way that humans make decisions on on anything that they do. So I'll give you a real easy example, but you can see that whatever it is you're doing, whether you're ordering a meal at a restaurant or you're making a complex business decision, these are the steps that you take. The first thing that you do is you collect some type of data. So for instance, if I was interested in buying a new automobile and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, the first thing I would do is start to research. And I would start to gather all sorts of information from the internet and put together all the data that I can related to cars. The next thing I would do is to study that, and I would start to absorb that and connect all the pieces and parts that I've found, and that starts to create information. What's happening here is that I'm starting to formulate the response that I really want to have, which is like, what car do I want to purchase? Well, it seems to me that a car with good gas mileage, like a hybrid, might be the direction that I want to go. And of all of the cars I've looked at, probably the Prius is the one that I want to go for. But I'm not quite sure of that. So the next thing that I do is I start interacting with the data and with people who understand about that. So I go to the dealership. I ask them for a test drive. I sit in the car. I do more research about the Prius. I talk to people who've currently owned the Prius to see what their experience is. And then at this point, I make a decision. And my decision is to purchase that. I form the whole, which is the decision to purchase, and I act on that. What ends up happening here is that I end up with wisdom. Wisdom only occurs after you are able to reflect back on your business problem. So 6 months from now, if I look back and I had the Prius, I can look back and I can say, you know what, that was the correct decision I made. But this is what really differentiates us from animals, is that we have the ability to look back in time and say, what happened to make me be at this particular point in time? And that's what you're doing with all business solutions too, if you think about it, is like, why are sales down? Let's understand why that is, and then let's make some type of decision that's linked to that. Changing over and thinking about this in the context of a business intelligence continuum, what we're really trying to do with business intelligence is to facilitate this human intelligence, because this is where the decisions are being made. Well, what is researching? Researching and gathering all of the parts and getting the data together is really the data warehouses that you currently have located throughout your company. The information is really shown via visualization tools, whether that's bar charts or graphs or reports or some type of interactive dashboard. The knowledge about that data is really created when people start collaborating with each other to understand what that data means, and then finally that enables human intelligence. So this is the continuum that you're trying to facilitate. If you look at business intelligence just a few years ago, what you'll see is that you have information that resides down in data warehouses, and on top of that we build graphs and charts and reports. Well, these graphs and charts and reports are really useless without a human being being able to interpret what this means. So you see the red slice of the pie? That red slice of the pie could be good or it could be bad. I don't really even know what it might mean, but it's only with my interpretation that that becomes something that's actionable. So if that red slice means profit, that's a pretty good slice of profit, and I might be happy with it. If it's the failure rate of one of my machine lines, maybe that's a bad thing. So again, it's the human interpretation on top of this, but this is typically what most business intelligence solutions deliver. When you think about your ROI, when you're implementing a software solution, what's happening is that you take that tool and you're pumping out these graphs and charts. But without the humans being able to interact with this, and by that I mean they're them adopting these as the tools that they want to use, your business intelligence effort will fail, and ergo you'll have very low ROI. Let's take a look at business intelligence when you add the collaboration, which is a human piece of it. We've got the business intelligence down here. This is the part that's facilitated by IT, the statisticians, DBAs. This is where all of the data comes in, point of sale data, ERP data. And this is the hardcore business intelligence. But on top of that, who's using the data? This is the human intelligence part. The tacit knowledge of people within the company, the long-time employees, your subject matter experts, these are the ones who have insights and experience with the data. These are the people who can tell you, for instance, why a part may be breaking. The data may report that you have a high failure rate on a particular part, but it's these people who can figure out why that would be occurring. You also have people who have explicit knowledge, people like line managers, designers, product managers, who truly understand how to fix the machinery to build a stronger part, for instance, or design something. So again, human intelligence, they're looking at the data in a different way, and they're able to make decisions that facilitate their business. And finally, you have your corporate strategists, your visionaries, your senior managers who are trying to pull the company forward. They also need to look at the data to see how much, what's going on with sales and how you would pull the company forward. But as you notice, again, most of the components of business intelligence are not about data, but it's about the humans, and about the humans, when you think about it, being able to collaborate with each other. So business intelligence is really about human collaboration. Take a look at this graph over here. If you implement a BI system in-house and you have a few analysts who are using it, that's great. But most companies would want to have additional people within their companies be able to have conversations about the data. So you would want your developers, your SMEs, your end users, the project managers to all be conversing about this. What's more, there's a level of collaboration that happens intra-departmentally. So you have managers and staff people and senior managers who all need to have access to the data and discuss with each other what's going on. On top of that, you also have a layer that requires interdepartmental communications. You've got C-level people who talk to each other, marketing people, inventory and procurement people, finance people. And finally, you also have collaboration with your customers, your suppliers, and vendors. So when you think about it, the value derived from business intelligence comes not from the data itself, but from human intelligence. And human intelligence is really the ability to interpret, interact with, and learn from that data. Now, because human intelligence is the biggest untapped competitive advantage that your company has, collaboration is key to making that initiative successful and hence driving ROI. A good BI system needs to be able, you need to be able to share knowledge, discuss anomalies, be able to shorten that decision-making loop so that you're not leaving money on the table, and most importantly, you need to involve the right people at the right time to make decisions. There have been a lot of accomplishments that have occurred over the last 2 decades when it comes to data warehousing. We've been able to overcome a lot of the silos of data by putting all that information into a data warehouse. But what's happened is that workers are still in silos. So you have your marketing department, your finance department, your sales department. We could very easily call that your marketing silo, your finance silo, and your sales silo, because they don't necessarily talk to each other as much as they should. So here's a situation that's played out every day across the country. The CEO sees something like this. They see their dashboard when they walk in, they see an anomaly in the data. The data shows something is wrong. The CEO sees that margins are down 14%. So what is the first thing that he does? He's going to call in his team, his direct reports, and he's going to ask them very politely, if you guys have a minute, can you tell me why margins are down 14% this month? Well, what's happened to that company? That has now become the new #1 priority for the company. Again, this is a disruption or a distraction, like we talked about earlier, where these 3 people who thought they were doing something today are now pulled off task to do something else. So what do? Using current BI tools, what they're going to do is try to solve the mystery of why margins are down 14%. So they start to collaborate with each other, and they start to have conversations, and you have the CFO call a meeting of his people and try to understand if they did the right thing in terms of gap recognition. Phone calls go out from the sales manager to see if everybody put everything into their pipeline. He's texting someone else, possibly Skyping another person, and you've got the marketing person pulling up reports and then emailing her staff. And what ends up happening is that you have 7 to 9 methods of communication that are used to solve the business problem. Now, these people now distracted other people to help solve this problem, so you have yet more productivity loss. But what ends up happening is that eventually the problem is solved. And it turns out that marketing had run a campaign where they gave a large discount last month, and that impacted margins, but we increased our sales by 50%, and that's a really good thing, and so everyone's happy with that. Now, here's the problem. As soon as the report goes back to the C-level person, all these conversations and all these different methods are lost. Collaboration helps to break down those silos, and by being able to have a tool where you can have collaboration of all of the people together in a place where you can memorialize all these conversations, helps you by allowing you not only to use human intelligence, but it starts to become collective intelligence. So everybody who knows something about this problem starts working with each other. So much less time is wasted coming to the answer. The collective intelligence will always result in better decision making because somebody knows something. And eventually what happens is this starts to empower organic intelligence. Organic intelligence means that there are people who can start to make business decisions before that 14% even happened, or to report that to the C-level people that we ran a campaign and margins will be affected, but sales are up 50%. That's a great thing. It may not have even turned into a distraction had it been reported early enough. So let's think about designing analytical applications using natural human intelligence process. And this is very important because this is the way that ROI is achieved. It's by mimicking the way people think. It's not by trying to implement a huge software solution. So the first thing that comes up is there's a business question that comes up. And so, in this particular case, the question was, why are margins down? The next thing we do is we start to design metrics. We try to figure out, well, how are we going to measure something in terms of a business question. Following that, we would take some type of action to figure out how we want to visualize that. Is it a graph? Is it a chart? Is it a report? It's that traditional BI view that we want to look at. And finally, we would validate that result through our expert people. And so what ends up happening is this is how people think, and this is how people solve business intelligence problems. So let's take a look at how a business question would come to fruition. Let's use an example of the sales manager, the senior management wanting to look at sales, for instance. They want to understand sales by region. So what happens is that they need to know that information, and they're going to ask that particular question, and the collaboration goes to the people, the longtime subject matter experts we talked about earlier, who end up designing the metrics, followed by the DBAs and the statisticians, who are the ones who develop and calculate the algorithms that we would be using in order to measure sales. And then finally, we would go to the accountants to validate that, in fact, these are the numbers that we should be looking at. So solving the business problem follows a continuum like this. So for those of you who are familiar with software development, this looks a heck of a lot like an agile sprint, and that's exactly where I'm going with it. So if you could take a 2-week sprint, for instance, and instead of trying to solve your entire business problem in one fell swoop, you did it in a sprint, you could answer these business questions one at a time. Nobody can answer all the business questions that are in a 35-page document all at the same time. So question, we need insight into sales estimates. Right, we need to see them by region, we need to see them by rep. When we start to communicate and we memorialize this information, we start to work with the people designing the metrics. This is how we want the formula to be. We need invoice clients, etc. The visualization, we want to take a look at it as a bar chart, pie chart, whatever. And then finally, all these figures are within alignment. And then we would push that out to a BI solution and allow people to look at this. So being able to mimic the human thought process is part of becoming successful in terms of a BI implementation. What collaboration looks like within a BI system is something like this. It's kind of like a social media thing that would drop down where people could talk about these particular KPIs you see here. This map, for instance, why are these certain dots yellow, which represents bad. We could talk about individual sales offices, etc. So the communications are captured as data within the BI system, and this facilitates communication. Remember when I first started, I said that most of the BI projects fail because of lack of communication. This is how you work with development and with the end users to actually figure out what information they want to see. When you look at a typical waterfall implementation, and this is where we start to get more detail on hard cost savings, we look at something like this. This is a typical implementation of a BI project. It looks a heck of a lot like a software project, which I mentioned earlier. The first part of any implementation is taken up by analysis, design, and coming up with some kind of project plan. And the next thing is that you give it to your developers and they start to construct SSIS packages, SSAS, etc. All sorts of data construction goes on. They start testing that system. They find errors in it. There's unplanned work that needs to be done. It goes to client acceptance, and eventually it's implemented. You have the data part of it. Now you start to put the visualization dashboards on top of that. Clients test it. Hopefully they don't find anything that requires additional data construction, because if it does, we go back and start this cycle over again, and at the end of the day we deploy it. Problem is that there's a large separation from the time that we actually started answering this question and the time that we actually delivered the software. Many of the people could have changed on the team over the course of the time. Well, part of what Halo does, our software platform, is that we minimize the amount of time it takes to do that data construction, and we build the visualization dashboards as the tools to validate the data that's in there. And that's the 2-week sprint that I showed you, or that sprint diagram. So what ends up happening is we have significantly less time to build it. It also requires fewer resources. Again, another a measure of ROI. One of the biggest cost savings you're going to gain from BI is being able to implement it more quickly than not, because I'll show you in just a minute how much that actually costs. Using Halo, we can shorten the traditional waterfall implementation in half, development time by 2/3, unplanned work by 2/3, and by doing the dashboards in parallel, we can save another 60% in time. Now, here's the problem when you do a traditional rollout of a BI project. You have about 18 different skill sets that work on a project like this over the course of the time. It starts out with a project lead and a project manager. You start to add your database resources, your SSIS resources, then your testing resources, etc. And a project can take 18 months and almost 3,000 hours to implement. This isn't unusual. Now, these are units of time. If it's a smaller project, you could say it's 18 weeks, or it could be a year. It doesn't really matter. The point here is that over this prolonged time period while you're doing implementation, you're paying all of these people to be working on this project. So you have a burn rate of somewhere between $15,000 and $20,000 per month until this BI project is implemented, not even counting the cost of the initial software. So in this example, the project would cost about $250,000 to implement. If you can reduce the number of resources and reduce the amount of time, it's obvious that it's going to be much cheaper. In this particular case, if we got the project out in half the time with fewer people, it would only take us 894 hours. Well, then our total cost to implement would be about $76,000 to implement. What ends up happening is that there are ways that we can use agile development to reduce that cost even more. And this is where a lot of your ROI is going to come in. If instead of using a traditional waterfall method, you end up using an agile method, you can start to do sprints, whether they're a month long or a week long. It depends on how agile your team really is. And if they can start to put out dashboards immediately that can be used to change your business processes and start to generate revenue, if that's your key indicator, sooner, then you can start to pay back your investment while you're in the development phase. When you take a look at cost, the reason it adds up so quickly is that it really has to do with the length of time that you're developing. So this kind of shows the cost of the two different methods. And by doing this, you can see you can save 70%. So there are two things that are adding up here. One is the number of resources you have on it, but on top of that, it's the length of time these resources are working. This list kind of goes through a traditional BI implementation and the type of skill sets that are required. And you'll see with our product, it takes less. Let's take a look at the initial labor payback, just on the implementation part of it. So if you are a $100 million company and you're experiencing 10% growth and you think that you can move the needle by 1/10 of a point, and I'll show you that in a second, what ends up happening is that you could pay back your investment of a short development cycle in about 9 months. So you purchase the software within a year and a half, you've paid back the implementation time. When it takes you 18 months to deploy it, your payback is much longer. In this particular case, it would take you 36 months to pay back your initial investment. And that's what traditionally people are finding. But if you use a agile method to do the implementation, what happens is that the payback happens much sooner, and essentially, if you work very effectively, you could possibly pay back the investment that you have in the BI project by the time the full thing was implemented. Here are some key metrics, and again, this is about ROI, so here's some key metrics that all businesses share. This takes a look, again, this is from the Aberdeen Hart-Hanks study that takes a look at profitability and revenue growth of the top companies who use BI versus average companies. Last year, 2011, manufacturing revenue grew 7.5%. Non-manufacturing revenue grew 2.1%. So these numbers are very optimistic. But let's just say on average your company was growing 10%. Wouldn't it be nice if you could use BI to get to that 40 to 41% profit margin? If you could, that would be a tremendous payback in terms of implementing BI. And that's really the goal of BI, is to move the needle on this particular metric. So assume that you have a $100 million company, you're achieving 10% profit growth, and you move that needle just by 10% of what's possible. Well, that would add $300,000 to your bottom line. If you're, and you can multiply these numbers, they scale right up. So if you're a $500,000 company, $500 million company, just multiply that by 5. Notice that we didn't go all the way to the top. We just improved it by a minute amount. Well, what's happened is that your ROI on your BI investment is 100% in the first year, simply by giving people dashboards and KPIs where they can effectively collaborate together and make better business decisions, essentially taking those 15 million decisions and making better ones. In the long term, you have even a higher ROI because you've paid for the implementation in year 1. Here's another key metric that all businesses share: customer retention. It is significantly more expensive to get a new customer than it is to maintain an existing customer. So if you can increase your customer retention by just 1%, in your $100 million company, that is worth $1 million to your top line revenue. So imagine having metrics that talk about customer satisfaction, getting those out to your end users, having them collaborate about that, making that their goal every day. Imagine how much more profitable your company could be if they didn't have to lose the customers that they lose each year and instead just added new customers. Your ROI in the first year would be somewhere on the order of 6.5 times your cost of implementing a BI solution if this was what you were trying to measure. I'd like to show you one more example, which is kind of interesting. This is employee retention. The award-winning companies report that they have an average turnover rate of about 11%, and that's significantly less than the average turnover rate of 38% that is reported by the U.S. Department of Labor. The interesting thing here is that these employees are knowledge workers, and how hard is it for you to rehire and train one of the key knowledge workers that you have in your company if they leave? You can't just plug somebody in like you can at Walmart with the example I gave about the the checkout stands. So the ROI of employee retention based on well-implemented BI is extremely high. I mean, if you save just 2 employees during the course of a year, you could look at a $250,000 savings in ramp-up time and lost productivity cost. Now, why do employees leave? Well, they leave because of high levels of frustration. It's because they're searching for data, they can't get to the data, they can't do their jobs right, and eventually they throw in the towel. The other reason that employees leave is that the company's not profitable and morale is low. And why is that happening? It's because people aren't collaborating on the key metrics. Again, that's a business intelligence solution that, if implemented correctly, helps keep and retain employees. Such an important thing, and a lot of us forget about how important it is to maintain all of those knowledge workers, because that's really your corporate IP. Without these people making decisions for you, driving your company forward, you can pretty much know that you're going to be struggling in business next year. And again, the ROI is extremely high on maintaining additional employees. So with that, I'd like to thank you for joining the webinar, and I hope I showed you a couple of different ways that you can look at ROI. First would be the time to deployment, a very important thing, the initial cost in terms of the number of people that you need to put on a team to implement these things, and finally, using effective KPIs and being able to communicate about those.